I went to the clinic because it was the closest option my insurance would cover. That was the only reason. It was a weekday morning, late spring, just after 9. I had a persistent pressure behind my right eye that had been coming and going for weeks. Nothing dramatic. No dizziness, no vision loss. Just enough discomfort to make me concerned, and just enough uncertainty to make me want someone else to tell me it was nothing. The building used to be a municipal records office. You could still see it in the layout. Long corridors, high ceilings, fluorescent lights that never quite matched. The clinic had been there for years by then, repurposed and renovated in stages. Different floors felt like different decades. Check-in was routine. Clipboard, laminated insurance card, the same questions I had answered dozens of times elsewhere. When the receptionist handed me a numbered slip instead of calling my name, I assumed it was a privacy thing. The waiting room was half full. People scrolling on phones, a woman filling out forms with a pen tied to the counter, a man staring at a muted television mounted too high on the wall. What I noticed first was the quiet. Not silence, but something close to it. No overhead music, no announcements, just the low hum of ventilation and the occasional door opening and closing down the hall. It felt more like a government office than a medical space. When my number was called, it was by a nurse I hadn't noticed before. She said it clearly, without inflection, and waited until I stood. She didn't look impatient, but she didn't smile either. That seemed normal enough. She led me through a side corridor I hadn't seen from the waiting room. The walls were painted a slightly different shade of white. Along the way were several doors marked with numbers instead of names. No specialty labels, no titles. She took my vitals in a small exam room. Blood pressure, temperature, a few standard questions. She typed my answers into a tablet without looking at me. Again, nothing unusual. I've had enough appointments to know that efficiency often looks like detachment. Before leaving, she asked me to confirm my full name and date of birth. I did. She paused for a moment, then asked me to repeat the date. I thought I might have misspoken. I repeated it. She nodded, as if satisfied, and left the room. I waited longer than expected. 10 minutes, then 20. The pressure behind my eye returned, sharper this time, though that might have been anxiety. I checked my phone, no signal. I assumed the building had poor reception. Eventually, a doctor came in. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, no white coat. He introduced himself with his last name only. He didn't sit. He stood near the door and asked me to describe my symptoms again. I did. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked a series of questions that were precise but oddly framed. Not just when the pain started, but where I was when I first noticed it. Not just whether it was worse at night, but whether it changed depending on who I was with. I answered honestly. I said I didn't see a pattern. He nodded. He asked me if I'd ever been treated at that clinic before. I said no. He asked if I'd been referred by another provider. I said no, just insurance. He looked at his tablet, then at me. He said he wanted to run a few tests. Imaging, neurological screening, routine things, he assured me. He said they'd start immediately. I was led out, not back to the waiting room, but further down the corridor. We passed more numbered doors. I noticed that some of the numbers skipped, from 12 to 16, from 21 to 30. I assumed renovations or repurposing. The imaging room was small and windowless. The technician was polite, almost overly so. She explained each step carefully. The scan itself was uneventful. Loud, uncomfortable, but familiar enough from previous experiences elsewhere. Afterward, she told me to wait in an adjacent room. She said someone would come get me. That room had no medical equipment, just a chair, a small desk bolted to the floor, and a poster about patient rights. The kind with bullet points and reassuring language. I sat down and waited. Time passed. I didn't know how much. My phone still had no signal. There was no clock. At some point, I realized the door had no handle on the inside, just a smooth metal plate. I stood and knocked, not hard, just enough to get attention. Nothing happened. I knocked again, louder. Footsteps approached. The door opened. A different nurse stood there. She asked if I needed something. I said I'd been waiting. She checked her tablet, frowned slightly, and said they were still reviewing my results. She asked me to sit tight. Before I could respond, she closed the door. I remember feeling embarrassed more than afraid, like I'd misunderstood something obvious, like I was being impatient in a system that had its own rhythm. Eventually, the doctor returned, same one as before. He sat this time across from me. He placed the tablet on the desk but didn't turn it toward me. He said the imaging didn't show anything alarming. No tumors, no bleeding. That was a relief. Then he said there were a few irregularities they wanted to monitor. I asked what kind. He said variations in pressure response, patterns that didn't align neatly with standard classifications. He said it calmly, clinically. He asked me if I'd ever felt watched in familiar places. I laughed a little and said no. He didn't react. He asked if I'd noticed people behaving differently around me lately. More cautious, more attentive. I said no. He nodded and said it was probably nothing. He said stress can manifest in subtle ways. He said the brain is good at filling gaps. He recommended observation. Not inpatient, he clarified quickly, just periodic check-ins. He said the clinic specialized in early detection, in cases that didn't yet fit established criteria. I asked if that meant a diagnosis. He said not yet. I was discharged shortly after. Same nurse walked me back, this time through a different corridor. I noticed that we passed a door labeled only with a letter, no number. At the front desk, I was given a follow-up appointment card. No doctor name, just a date and time, 2 weeks later. Outside, my phone signal returned immediately. I checked the time. I had been inside for nearly 4 hours. Over the next few days, the pressure behind my eye diminished. Not gone, but manageable. I considered canceling the follow-up. It felt unnecessary. Then I started noticing small things. A voicemail from the clinic reminding me of my appointment left before I'd even received the card. An email survey asking about my experience, referencing procedures I didn't remember undergoing. I chalked it up to administrative error. At work, my manager asked if I'd been feeling okay. He said someone from a healthcare provider had called to verify my schedule in case I needed accommodations. He assumed I had authorized it. I hadn't. I called the clinic. The receptionist couldn't find a record of the call. She confirmed my appointment and suggested I discuss any concerns with my provider at the visit. 2 weeks later, I went back. This time, the waiting room was emptier. Same quiet, same television. My number was called almost immediately. The nurse took me to a different exam room, larger, with 2 chairs instead of 1. The doctor joined us, along with another person I hadn't met before. She introduced herself as part of the assessment team. She didn't specify her role. They asked more questions, some repeated, some new, about my routines, my social interactions, my decision-making. They framed everything as standard screening. At one point, the second clinician asked me how I would feel if someone else made decisions on my behalf, temporarily, for my own benefit. I said I didn't see why that would be necessary. She smiled just briefly and said it was a hypothetical. They concluded by saying my condition remained inconclusive. They recommended continued monitoring. They said compliance was important for accuracy. As I left, I noticed a man sitting alone in the waiting room. He looked healthy, alert. He met my eyes and held the look a moment longer than felt natural. Then he looked away. In the weeks that followed, the clinic contacted me more frequently. Appointment reminders, check-in calls, suggestions, always polite, always framed as optional. But each time I declined or postponed, the pressure returned. Sharper, more insistent. I haven't gone back in months. The symptoms have stabilized mostly. But every so often, I receive a message addressed to me, referencing data I don't remember sharing. Sometimes I wonder if the clinic was simply thorough, ahead of its time. Sometimes I consider that authority often presents itself quietly, wrapped in concern and procedure. And sometimes, when the pressure returns, I think about that door without a handle, and how easily I sat down and waited when I was told to.